Now we'll quickly move towards the end of this presentation, which talks about what are the what we now, since we have discussed the impacts of climate change, now we will discuss what are we doing and what is supposed to happen after this. Since we acknowledge that the climate change has been impacting a lot of sectors, now we'll see now what are we supposed to do. Now what? In long term, everyone will feel the effects of climate change. However, some people might are currently feeling more than what the others are. Poor countries are less able to adapt to the climate change, therefore they are suffering more. And then there is also less able to develop because they need to focus on the addressing the challenges caused by the climate change, and they are not able to focus on their developments and the economies because they are tackling with the impacts of climate change. So the countries who have contributed least to the climate crisis are the ones who are affected the most. And I don't think it's fair for us, for especially the developed countries and the least developed countries.
I'm showing you this slide once again, and I really want everyone to understand the importance of this slide. I think I have already mentioned that the warming of planet is definitely going to have an impact on the various regions. So, some of the regions which are more vulnerable to climate change. So, climate change is not evenly distributed globally, with certain regions will be facing heightened vulnerability due to combination of factors. And some of the regions will be Somalia is highly vulnerable to climate change, and challenges like droughts and extreme flood, food insecurities, the country's political instability will also hamper to address the climate crisis effectively. We'll have a look at the same slide that I showed you on the major weather events that occurred in 2023. This way we will be able to see how many these countries where these countries are located majorly. So, like I mentioned in my previous slide, that Somalia is very much at the high risk of, vulnerability to climate change. Then comes Syria. Over a decade of conflict in Syria has weakened the country's profile, and it challenges like drought and extreme food insecurity. Then the country's political instability has also hampered its ability and its need to address the climate crisis effectively, and then leaving the vulnerable communities at risk. Then South Sudan is also experiencing severe impacts of climate risk. Then rising temperature leading to increased floodings and droughts. The country is also facing extreme food scarcity, displacement, and significant portion of its population is also experiencing severe hunger. Then Haiti is particularly vulnerable to the climate change as an island in the Atlantic hurricane basin, making it susceptible to hurricanes. The country's socio-economic challenges and environmental threats further exacerbate its vulnerability to climate related disaster. Then Lagos and Nigeria. Lagos faces extreme risk of climate change vulnerability indices due to its exposure to vulnerable climate hazards. And the city dense population and economic significance amplify the challenges posed by the climate change. Impacts like flooding and heat waves. Then comes Yemen, which is very much in the news for all the wrong reasons. And Yemen also faces an extreme risk of water stress and other climate related challenges. The country's dependence on oil import makes it more susceptible to economic impacts from global efforts to reduce emissions, and further implicating its vulnerability to climate change. Now, these regions are among the most vulnerable to adverse effects of climate change. Then, facing a range of challenges from extreme weather events to food insecurity and displacement. Then, addressing the vulnerabilities of these regions require more concentrated efforts in building resilience. then implementing adaptation strategies and providing support to mitigate the impacts of climate change in their population. So it, all in all, it highlights the importance of more comprehensive strategies, and how why the climate risk assessment has become an important tool to assess the region's vulnerability, because at the moment every single region is going through different problems. So we need to assess the region, we need to understand its vulnerability, and then we will be able to hit the target with a better flow. So, to those countries who have been contributing very least to the climate crisis are ones who are affected the most. So, is it fair for us? So, we know that the climate change has far reaching implications and future impacts that are already being observed and are projected to intensify. And some of the key latest findings are that in, the current impacts will be the global temperature has already risen nearly 2 degree Fahrenheit due to the human induced greenhouse emission, and leading to the shrinking of glaciers, earlier ice breakups, shifting plants, animal ranges, and more intense heat waves. So climate change is also causing, disruptions like droughts, as we already saw in our previous slides, the extreme wildfires, the extreme rainfalls, and the sea level rise at faster rate than previously assessed. So some of these changes are irreversible over the next 100 years to 100 to thousands of years, and different regions are experiencing specific challenges. For example, the northeast faces heat waves and sea level rise, impacting infrastructure and agriculture, while the southwest deals with the increased wildfires, droughts, and declining water supplies. Then the future projections are also that the severity of climate impacts will depend on human activities, and more greenhouse emission will lead to widespread damaging effects globally, and it will affect all the regions on the earth. The IPCC sixth assessment report also warns that without immediate mitigation and adaptation actions, diverse impact will also escalate the every incremental of global warming. Then the report stresses that the global temperature will continue to rise for many decades due to human activities, and climate change is expected to increase at a very high rate. So, these reports and these analyses are definitely highlighting the need for rapid and substantial action to mitigate climate change and adapt to its impacts. So the consequences of inactions are dire, with projections in the future where extreme weather events become more frequent and severe. Ecosystems face also collapses. Food security is threatened. Vulnerable communities will bear the brunt of climate related challenges. Then, addressing climate change requires more global cooperation and decisive measures to secure sustainable future for all. In our next presentation, we will see how the climate risk assessment will be impacting our region to least say, and we will take up a case study of Bay of Bengal region to analyze how there are various factors affecting one region and how different the climate change impacts are in different regions.
Now, what should we do? In short, it's not looking good for us. If you're going to avoid the prediction, we need to step up and take actions against the climate change. For example, we need to reduce the carbon footprints, not at the international level, but also at the national and individual level. Then there is need for urgent, widespread, and ambitious reforms that are needed to fight the climate change. And we will discuss more of it in our next presentation. For the time being, thank you for your attention. I look forward to seeing you again.